Okay, so that was the first part, was on the server side. On this side, how we actually go and get data from a server and do something with that data. Okay, again, this part is going to be two parts. The first part is how we get the data from a server. And the second part is how we take that data and then get all the information from it. All right, so now you can download the whole project, the whole entire project, which is working project. You just click on this and it download the project, which include the Swift code plus that store listing PHP code. Now, if you go to let's open the project and take a look at it. Now, the way this project is constructed, it has basically, if you look at the table, if we look at the main storyboard, we have a navigation controller, we have a table view controller, and we have a view controller. In the table view controller, what we do is that we go get the data from the server, parse the information out, and display the result in this table view controller. In the detail view controller, when I click on one of these cells, it shows you the detail of that store in that cell. Okay. Now let's take a look at this cell. This cell is actually a custom cell. You see that? If you click on it here, and you see there's actually, it's a custom cell. And the class for this cell is called Store Table View Controller. So I have a class called Store Table View Controller Cell, I guess I should have called it. So I have a cell, and here is my cell. All right, and it has all the outlet connected to that cell. All right. Now, if we go back to the main storyboard, okay, and in this cell I have a label, and an image, okay, and I have an accessory here. When you click on, when you select it, basically it shows this detail. All right. Now let's take a look at the code for that table view controller. In the table view controller, what I have, we have a few things that we need to be familiar with. First, I have an array of data, an array that represents stores, that has a list of all the stores. Now, this array is empty at the beginning, and it has object stores. So if we look at the store object, this class is store. What do we have in it? We have information, attributes similar to the one that we have in the table view control, in the table from the database. And typically that's what you do. You construct your object similar to what you have in the database or what you got from the database. So now I have store name, all these attributes. So we have all these attributes, and we have all these, we have a constructor, default constructor, and one that receive data and update the object attributes with it. Now, in your case, if you're doing a different example, if you're doing, for example, car listings, or you're doing museums listing, whatever it is, what would you do here? You define a different class, and that class will have the attributes that represent your data on the database. So you will have a car model or a car price, whatever. So this will you will have to change this or create another class, right? Similar to this. Okay, let's go back to the table view controller. In the table view control, so that's the first thing happens. We create this empty array. Now in the table view controller and the view did load, the first thing I do is I call this function called load records. We're gonna look at this load record. What does this load record do? It simply goes to the server with that URL and gets the data. All right. So in your case, what you have to do in any scenario that you want to download data from a server, this is, you just simply copy this function and modify it to to suit your needs. All right. Let's continue. I have number of sections for that table 1. The number of rows for that table is depending on the array count, the store listing count. So store list count. And this part, what do? This part is we construct the cell. So what do? Give me using the row for that cell, the row number for that cell, give me the record that I found in that array. But at the beginning, this array is empty. You're not going to get anything in here. And after I get the object that's stored in the array, we update the cell labels with the values from that store object. And we have an image, so I use the store image name, which should be stored in your application. This example does not show you how we download images from the data. I've done similar examples before. You can watch them to download the image from the server, all right? You use the link and you download the image from the server. All right, this function is prepare for Segue. What do? When I click on that cell, it takes me to the detail view controller, and I'm just explaining it to you what we're doing. We've done this before too. So this part take me to the detail and passing to it the object that I clicked on. All right, this is that part, the load record. So what do we do in this load record? First, I define my URL string. This is my URL string. All right? In your case, if you have a different URL or somebody gave you a different URL, we'll just have to change this. Okay? Now, next is that these two parts are related. What are we doing? We're creating a session. This session has default configuration. So I'm creating a session with the default configuration. A session, think about a session. Session is very similar to when you do HTTP request and response. So you have actually a session working in the background that manages that communication between your app and the server. All right? So what do? I say use the configuration default, connect. I don't have a delegate and I don't have a delegate queue. All right? Just I want a plain session that is going to get my data. You can do more advanced stuff with this, but we're just doing a simple session processing. After I do this, I create a URL object with the URL string that I defined up here. Why do we do a URL object? Because the URL object can validate if your link is valid or not. This URL can be locally on your machine, like it could be a path for a file, so it couldn't find that file. So in this case, it's on a server side. So I want to verify that the URL string that I have is valid. And if it is not valid, if it is valid, I continue the next piece. So if the URL is not nil, what do? This is the meat of your process. Everything else is just for definition. We create a request with that URL. We run the request using session get data task that we use the request that we created. This part is important that you understand it. It has something called completion handler. What is a completion handler? All right, so what does this completion handler mean? If you go to a browser and type in www.xyz.com, right? That request is going over the network, is going over the internet. Does that take time or not? It does take time. And sometimes the response takes time to come back to you. So that's why you have something called completion handler. It means when my request is completed, I want you to do the following. What do you want to do? When it's completed, you will get data, possibly. You will get a response, and you will get an error, possibly. So I check. If you want to know if you got an error or not, you check. Is the error not nil? If error is not equal to nil, means that you got an error. If data is not nil, it means that I got some data, but it doesn't mean that the data that I got is JSON data. All right? It means I got some data. Now, this part is not important, but I did it so I can see what data I'm getting. I'm converting the data, this data that we got from here, to what? To a string. using this encoding. So I convert it to a string and I print it to see what data looks like. What does the data look like? This part is the important part. This part is actually takes the data and converts it into, or verify that it is JSON data, converts it into JSON data that I can process within my app. It's called JSON serialization. Okay, and the data comes to me as a dictionary. A dictionary, why is it a dictionary? I'll tell you why, because if you look in here, I have an attribute and a value. That's why it's called a dictionary. Attribute, value. Key, value. Attribute, value. All right? Key, value. So now if I go back, so it's going to come to me as a dictionary. Now I can print it out. It was successful. Then I get my, and then you will see this, and I can get my JSON data all separated. Now I need to look for this thing called stores. I want to get the value, the attribute value for the attribute for this value stores, which would be the array of all the objects. How do I do it? First, I convert this as a dictionary to a string, any object, a string, so I can actually search by a string. Okay, so I'd say make it a string object. Now I'd say, and here I say, find me the record with that. Find me the value. Give me the value for that attribute called stores. So what do you get from here? You will get from here, this is the attribute. So you get the array, the entire array of all the objects. All right. And in this case, in this part, we're doing JSON data. Sometimes you're not doing JSON data. You're doing, for example, images. This part, if you're not doing images, if you're not doing JSON data, this part is not needed. You take the data and convert it into an image. All right? That's how you do image download. So if it is successful, we're going to call this function. This function responsibility is to parse out the data. Now, and so you might see an example where they do it all in here. I don't like to do that because it it makes the code a little bit more complex. So, but I know that if I want to, now if I break it this way, I can go to the code, to that function, and I know where the errors are, or if I have an error, all right, regarding parsing the data. All right, so, and then if we got an error, I print out that we have maybe no Wi-Fi, or we got some sort of an error. Finally, what do we have? We have this resume thing. What is this resume? This thing here, right here. Do you see that? I say keep on trying to download the data, because what happens when you're going over the network, you get interruption, and without this, you get some data and you stop. So you need to do resume in order to continue downloading until the request is totally completing. All right, I know it's a little bit too much, but it's important that you understand these things, okay? I'm gonna stop on this part. The last part is easier than this. We'll talk about parsing the data, okay?